So my guest today has been an innovator, a trailblazer, ahead of the curve on implementing new technologies in the world of content and media for decades now. Obviously, the technology that everybody has their eyes and ears on these days in terms of media or just everyday lifestyle activities would be artificial intelligence. She's now become an evangelist and kind of the translator of AI technology for the rest of us. My good friend Taryn Southern, thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to see you.
It's great to see you.
I never
too.
thought I'd make it onto this couch.
You did. Yes, you did. You knew you'd be here for many years.
At some point.
We'll get back to our origination story by the end of this chat.
It's a good one.
Absolutely. So in terms of you understanding new technologies, being willing to adopt them early, and using them to your benefit as a creator, why don't you take us back to how that began with your activities as one of the earliest YouTubers, and then we can kind of lead into how you were getting involved in artificial intelligence and its utility before ChatGPT was a twinkle in anybody's eye.
Sure, and I think it's those things are actually quite connected. I think about my early days on YouTube, and really it was this window to be seen. It was this window to connect to people outside of our immediate networks.
But you're sitting there at the first few years that you moved to LA, trying to be an actress in the more traditional sense in traditional television and film, and then YouTube and the internet presents itself, and then your observations were what?
This is an incredible opportunity. Mm-hmm. This will change everything. I think, I was working as a TV host at the time and wanting to get into acting and didn't have an agent for acting. It was one of those weird recursive problems where you have to get an agent to get work, but you can't get work without an agent.
Sure.
And I noticed that people were starting to upload sketches and clips of themselves onto YouTube. And one of the first people that I looked up was Jessica Lee Rose, who was this Lonely Girl 15 character.
Oh, wow, Lonely Girl 15.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
Kind of the first big hit web series. But when people first started watching her, they thought it was a real story of a real 16-year-old girl vlogging from her bedroom. It was really this actress in Los Angeles who was hired for the job.
Yours, though, right?
She became a friend of mine.
Okay, she became a friend afterwards.
Yes, I ended up reaching out to her and we became friends. But her story was pretty extraordinary. She went on to work quite a lot in television in her early 20s as a result of that. And so I just saw it as an opportunity to make stuff, to be seen. There was no way to make money at that point in time.
Even for a few years afterwards.
Oh, for a while afterwards. Yeah. I mean, I like to joke. I always get into everything before there's any money to be made, and then I swiftly leave. Right as
if you stick around with this AI thing, the money might start coming sooner rather than later. And so you acknowledge, identify this as an opportunity to kind of circumvent the traditional Hollywood system and gaining notoriety or becoming a content creator and getting your content, your talents out there. And that led you to do what?
Yeah, I made my first YouTube video in 2007.
Okay.
It was a parody of a video called Obama Girl.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember that, but there was a girl singing, "I've got a crush on Obama" for the 2007 primaries. And I did the lesbian love song version of that for Hillary Clinton.
As one would.
As one would. And I don't know why I chose that as my first foray.
Going off instinct, right? As all creatives need to. And so that was very successful.
It did well. It got a couple million views, and I ended up on MSNBC and I think Fox News doing some correspondent work. And that was the moment where I realized, okay, this actually has legs.
Sure.
People are seeing this as something real. Although in the entertainment industry at that time, doing YouTube was very much a faux pas.
It was frowned upon.
It was frowned upon. You were sort of seen as a D-list or a C-rate actor.
There was still the phrase user-generated content, right? And it's interesting. It would be interesting to look back and see when that phrase was phased out and that user-generated content was no longer considered user-generated. I was like, oh, this is talent. These are the creators. These are people who otherwise would be actors or actresses. They're creating content on YouTube or other digital platforms. So the idea that this is just amateurish because it didn't come through the valve of a studio or a network is no longer relevant.
That's right. But there were no gatekeepers. It was amazing. And it was this wild, wild west. All of the early YouTubers started moving to LA around 2008, 2009. So there was a pretty close-knit community of us that would hang out and just shoot videos for fun. And it was certainly not anything close to what
Sure.
It became, even in 2014, 2015, it was a completely different beast.
But you still very much, those involving themselves in this were early adopters and noticed something before everybody else did.
Yes.
As you did hint at, you did not continue as robustly with your YouTube content creator career for whatever reason, but you were interested in new technologies. Those new technologies became a higher compute and became more powerful and interesting, and your interest shifted to that, and eventually led you to artificial intelligence, machine learning, but a little bit earlier than a lot of other people. And I imagine that was tell us about how you started to dip your toes in that and were utilizing artificial intelligence pre-pandemic, when it was in the very much YouTube 2007 and 2009 phase.
Yeah, so I think had I not done YouTube, I don't know if I actually would have stumbled upon AI as early as I did. Because a lot of us who were on YouTube, we were always looking for the most efficient tools to get to accomplish what we needed to accomplish, which was churning out video content.
Okay.
Which was part of the reason that I found myself disillusioned by the space. By 2015, 2016, you had all these social media platforms. Now all of a sudden you weren't just making a video for YouTube, you were making videos for Instagram and Twitter and all these things. So the more tools you had to make that process easier, the better.
Sure.
And I remember stumbling upon an article in the New York Times about music being written with AI. This was 2016. And I was in a Google Artist in Residence program and experimenting with these different emerging technologies, mostly in the VR, AR space.
Okay.
But I read this article and I was like, I wonder if I can just play around, experiment with these tools, see if I can integrate it into my projects with the Google program. I started playing around and it was this, mushroom cloud that went off in my brain. I couldn't believe how sophisticated these tools were. I'm like, no one's talking about this. This is very strange. I can make really good music. Let me rephrase that. I can make, for someone that has no traditional music experience, I can produce an entire track from my bedroom that sounds decent with the help of these tools. And so I ended up reaching out to 5 or 6 different companies at the time that were developing the tools, got my hands on all the kind of behind the scenes. A lot of them didn't have commercially available software, and created an album in 2017.
Interesting. And what was the reaction to that album? How did you use that as a case study on what AI can accomplish and how you are one of the leading creators experimenting with that then would lead to more opportunities in this space?
I think the reaction to the album was pretty much what you would expect. There were a lot of people who were horrified by this idea of machines making music and had a lot of questions, as would be reasonable. There were also a lot of other musicians and creatives, particularly in the content creator space, and I would say in the electronic music space, that were very interested because they were accustomed to using technology as the canvas to bring their ideas to life.
No taboo or no shame about not being able to sit there and strum on a guitar.
That's
and everyone wants to throw out the line, oh, they're just pressing buttons. Well, the buttons produce some sounds. Some people like the sounds and I get paid to push those buttons, so I'm not going to have any reservations about it.
That's right. So I remember having a number of meetings with a handful of pretty prominent electronic music managers who were very interested in understanding how they could get these tools in the hands of their clients and start using them. So it was a really fun kind of solitary project, but I loved it. And I also learned so much about making music. And that was the other part of my aha moment, was that we all have different learning styles, learning capacities. Some of us are audio learners, some of us learn better by reading, visual learners. And I'm such an analytical brain that for me, breaking music down into parameters really helped me understand it better. And I think my ability to actually, speak the language of a producer had improved so much from this process than from the typical process of maybe working with another music producer. So I found that fascinating.
Absolutely. We're going to get into the details about the applications and utility of AI on producing music and where it's how it's evolved since you identified it in 2017, 18, and where it is right now and where it's going to go, which is fascinating and thrilling in a lot of ways. But then what has that led you to as a leading prominent voice and go to as kind of the translator, and both the translator of AI for some of us lay people and the instructor on how to utilize AI, and someone that major corporations and the companies that are most focused on this space are looking to chime in on how this technology should develop and be used?
So I'm looking at it really, I'm focused primarily on two areas. One is how can we use AI to augment, to amplify our creativity, and really dissecting that process, the human creativity process, and then figuring out how to optimize the use of these tools in a variety of applications, whether that be storytelling, written storytelling, music, video, but also mental health, like personal development, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Then there's the other category, which is sort of equally as fascinating, but maybe a few years down the line, and that's where is AI going in the next 5-10 years? What should we be prepared for? I've been working in neurotechnology now for, I don't know, 5-6 years, and kind of a strange career evolution, but looking at how we're using AI now to decode the human brain, and what some of the interfaces that are coming down the line, brain-computer interfaces that are using AI to decode the human brain and connect it to digital devices, like what that means for all of us as we get older and age.
And so there's one company I noticed that I believe it's BlackRock Neuroscience.
BlackRock Neurotech.
Okay, Neurotech in terms of the uses to decode the human brain, and we're going to get to some of the utilities of that in the healthcare space in a moment. And then you're also from maybe, I guess, kind of a more media content consumerist perspective, advising companies on how to use AI and what's coming down the pike, and I'm sure, I have no doubt some of them have thrown offers your way to come in and work full-time for XYZ Corporation, probably far less interesting than being able to work with all these various companies, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun going in and figuring out how can these different companies integrate this technology into their teams. And if it's only making people faster, smarter, more efficient, I think we're missing the boat. And so it's really about how do you take advantage of the skill sets that you might have and get rid of the things that you hate doing using these tools.
Interesting. Okay, so in terms of media and content and how this is going to redefine it, I mean, in real time at rapid pace, redefining how content is created, our expectations for content, and then obviously downstream in terms of the lives of people who were involved in creating content, because some of them may become obsolete, some of them need to evolve in certain ways that make them more administrators of technology as opposed to people generating substantive assets themselves. And so OpenAI, I believe, the just game-changing technology released last week, Sora is the name, and that's a text-to-video generator,
yes,
I believe. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit foundationally about just basically text-to-video generators, and then specifically what is so exciting and groundbreaking and rocked everybody's world about Sora last week.
Okay, and before I even get into what Sora is and how it works, I mean, what was your reaction when you saw the outputs?
It was of course, very impressive, right? However, I'm a little bit limited because so many times I've seen, and this we track back and something that we skipped over, we can maybe talk about how AR and VR got kicked around so much, and those terms got kicked around. Endless financial sources, venture capital funds, God knows who, incinerated money throwing it at VR and AR companies and utilities to see who was going to become some massive player like the OpenAI of that space. And I'm sure some of them are doing some stuff somewhere, but I think most of that money was incinerated because these technologies have not gained mass adoption, but AI, it looks like, will. So I could sit there and say, okay, that looks pretty cool, but I'm going to have a layer of skepticism that, all right, I saw some AR, VR stuff that was pretty cool, and it didn't gain mass adoption. Not to say that this won't, but I'm limited in kind of my prejudices from seeing other impressive technologies that didn't really go anywhere. So impressive, super cool. All right, wait, this is going to put a lot of people out of business and out of jobs, but I'm not entirely sure where it goes.
Totally fair. I think the difference between AR, VR, and AI is that AR, VR require the adoption of a new device.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
When we're looking at these LLM models, large language models that are being used to write text, to create images, to create sound effects, to create video. We don't need to adopt any sort of new device in order to utilize them and to make them work for us. I truly think, and I'll knock on the fake leather.
Yeah, or whatever the fabric is, we can knock on it.
We came up with
wood.
I truly believe that we are witnessing right now the most transformative technology of our time, at least up until the point that I've been born. And we've seen a lot of we've seen the evolution of a lot of things. We didn't even have cell phones when we were younger.
Listen, how did people not get anywhere? Like, forget MapQuest, they needed maps. I don't know where to drive. And anyways, you get the idea. Yes, we've seen some pretty extreme advancements in technology, and you believe this one is going to outstrip all of those.
I do.
And I've seen some smart people who have mentioned that, and they said that, if you're planning for the rest of this decade, you need to plan for a world where we have compute speeds and capabilities 10 times what we have right now. And that's hard for us to even think about how pervasive technology is even in our world, particularly for phone obsessives like myself. And we're sitting here and thinking, all right, a bunch of this stuff that we saw in projections of the future from the films of the late 20th century, the Back to the Future 2s or God knows what. And obviously, to imagine maybe not flying cars, but some other version of advanced technology and looking at, all right, what are the steps in between here and there? And we might look at how much progress we've made by 2024 and say, we haven't gotten that far towards the most impressive stuff from those historical projections, but maybe literally there's advancements over the next 5 to 8 years that literally will get us there in a heartbeat. And that's interesting to consider.
100%. And all of those advancements require massive compute. And what we're seeing now is the price per watts of energy. I mean, it just keeps going down and down and down because of these semiconductors. And
so you're saying invest in NVIDIA?
Yes. I mean, I don't know if you've missed the boat, so don't take my investment advice.
But, if some of this stuff does play out, NVIDIA seems like a good bet. But they're at least the leader in creating the I guess it's hardware, but has a software component, the chips and the technology that's going to power all this, exponential input in computing power from a place that's already pretty high.
That's right. And I believe that they're on track to surpassing Apple now in terms of market cap, which is just absolutely insane.
No, that's wild.
So, our landscape ahead is going to look very, very different. And I think Sora, which was OpenAI's text-to-video model, is a perfect example of that. I mean, here, I don't know if you saw the AI videos that were coming out a year ago. I actually started working with some of these software models back in 2017, 2018. They weren't even large language models back then. They were recursive AI models. They worked very differently.
Interesting. What's the difference between large language models, LLMs, which is a term a lot of people might hear thrown around, and what you just mentioned?
I'm going to do a terrible job of explaining this because I'm not an engineer, but essentially it's just the way that the data is categorized, the way the data is labeled. In the large language models, it's all done via language labeling, language modeling, whereas recursive or generative adversarial models might be something different. So, for instance, a generative adversarial model, you give the AI model 3, 4, 5, options. It spits something out at you, and then you say, that's bad, that's good, that's bad, that's good. And that's how it learns what's good or bad. It's just this long sort of rolling process back and forth with the engineering team versus these new large language models just function very differently.
It's just a massive pool of language and phrases and terms plugged into some sort of system, and it hones down, the learning process and the understanding and the neural networks in the system to a level at which it can create really cool stuff and really accurate stuff.
Correct. Okay. And I don't remember anyone talking about LLMs in 2017, 2018. I don't think anyone...
2021!
I don't think people thought we can recreate pixel by pixel on a screen using a language model. Okay. I think they thought you had to do something, you had to ingest that data and assess that data in a different way.
Okay, and so this is this being text to image generator. It's literally like you just describe what you want and it creates it.
It just creates it.
Yeah. Wow.
And I actually just read a paper yesterday about what the back-end data model looks like for the AI to determine when you say, I want a puppy that's running through the grass and is sniffing a mushroom. Like, where does it determine at what point in the video to have all of these things happen? And it was a really fascinating.
Wow. Yeah.
It was a fascinating paper. But I don't know if LLMs will actually be the AI model that gets us to the next stage of.
Do we know what the other options are?
I mean, there's a lot of really smart people working on them, and enough. Using words that I fail to understand.
If we get to the point in which, all right, a person at your level of understanding understands LLMs, it's whether or not the next iteration of that. I mean, you're obviously at the forefront of that understanding, and who even knows? I mean, there's the people working on what the next iteration are took more chemical engineering or electrical engineering courses than I did. All right, so.
But I think it will start to resemble more of as we get into quantum computing and assuming that that's actually possible and having that level of compute power, we'd be looking at something that resembles more of the human brain.
Okay.
So we don't only categorize things by language. I mean, we certainly use language as a way to label things in our mind and to store memories. But when you have a memory, you might be coming to that memory from a place like a sense memory, from smell, from touch. From a visual. And so when we think about the future models, they'll be more diverse in terms of how they're approaching learning.
Okay, so interesting. We'll get a little bit deeper into that in terms of how it plays into some of the more practical, what you mentioned about brain-computer interfaces and whatnot, and the uses there. But sticking with content for a moment or two.
Oh yeah, sorry. I never answered your Sora question about what does this mean for content?
What does this mean for content? I mean, are you going to be able to, how long in 18, 24 months are you going to be able to, is a film producer or a screenwriter going to be able to speak a movie into a recorder and out pops a movie that requires no physical production whatsoever, no animators and no actors?
Yes.
Woo!
Yes, and I believe it will be indistinguishable.
Wow.
Within 2 years.
That is both exhilarating and kind of scary, and well, not as scary for us as it is for people working in physical production. But anyways, and
it's a lot to take in. I mean, you have to think. I don't know. You probably know better than I do what the size of the entertainment industry is. The capital market.
Sure.
That's pumped into this industry. That's based here in LA every single year. And what happens to that when you have a technology like this that is decentralized, that can be used really anywhere? I have some theories on what is going to happen. Of course, I have no crystal ball, but it's, I'm sure, I heard that there was a group of comedy writers that held some meeting last week in a panic. They have an animated show. And what do you do with all of these animators? And what do you do with just just people who've dedicated their lives to perfecting these crafts? And undoubtedly, this will impair their future work.
And then there's the question of, because listen, this isn't the first time there's been a technology that at first glance looked like it would completely replace some profession or some trade and ended up, either animating and exaggerating it, or just it required those people to become more managers of the technologies and users of the technology, just like people thought when Excel came around, okay, that accountants are done, and well, no, now you just need to hire accountants to handle Excel and the inputs in there. And maybe some of these animators are going to need to be the creative minds that are going to help further hone the inputs into the technology and manage the AI process. But then comes the question of, okay, does that just mean that there's space for 1/50th as many of them?
That's right.
So it's going to be extremely, extremely disruptive, both to feature film, long form, creative, scripted content, and to commercial content. I've already spoken with some people that have branding agencies or branded content agencies, and they're already starting to recalibrate, and are not entirely sure the extent to which they need to. But you also wonder, okay, you might be able to. Polar Express was like groundbreaking in its use of animation. So maybe in 18 months, there's going to be a few Polar Express and analogous level animated productions, but hey, people still want to see real people, and they're still familiar with Margot Robbie or Timothée Chalamet or God knows who else, and so it's going to disrupt a portion of the market as opposed to the entire market. That's probably the more likely place we see ourselves at within the next couple years, I imagine.
You're right, and actually, I should have prefaced my bold future prediction with the fact that I don't think we'll have human AI human AI renderings done to the quality that is necessary within 2 years. Okay. So your Margot Robbies of the world, I think they're just fine for the next 2 years.
Yeah. If you're Margot, I don't know if you're, coming up in her lane, you might have some trouble.
But if we're talking about animated films, CGI, Pixar type stuff, I mean, all of that, I mean, it's really possible now. Right now, you could make a movie that looks Pixar quality in your bedroom.
Yeah, what you did a couple videos on your Instagram that looked that level of quality.
Yeah, and that was not even with Sora. That was with an older version.
Really?
That was an older version of DALL-E plugged into Runway.
And it is evolving and growing and improving at a rapid pace.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's filmed audio video content. Where we're at in terms of music and verbal communication. I mean, so another interesting usage was like in real time language translators.
Yes.
You were speaking in Japanese, I believe, on camera. I think it was used by the Argentinian president Milei in his a UN speech where it was essentially looked like it was perfectly dubbed, where you could not even tell there was any distinction between the way his mouth was moving and like him speaking in English, even though he gave the speech in Spanish or Argentinian. Is that a language? Anyways, so tell us about that technology.
And we need a new word to describe this because we typically have captions or we have dubbing for sort of foreign language film translations, video translations. And now we can simply transform our own faces and our voices so that it's me speaking Japanese with my accent, with my exact vocal tone.
Okay.
With utter perfection.
Yeah.
And you also cannot visually tell.
God, so we need to do a whole new generation of Kung Fu movies where people are just speaking English.
That's right.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, it's going to make our experience watching foreign films so much better. Because we're not going to have to deal with those annoying dubs of someone else's voice instead of the actor's
There's
voice,
going to be foreign films that we essentially, at the push of a button, can translate and then become American films.
Yeah, and I think that's actually really exciting because then we'll have this whole new repertoire of amazing film
and people can lament the authenticity of the original language, but listen, if people have to read the captions anyways, that interferes with that experience. It obviously would be superior if spoken in the language that people understand.
Sure. But yes, there's a number of these technologies that are out from that to music is obviously a big space where fans are creating their own fan songs, utilizing the voices of their favorite
some features and some like Google Collab and what else did you know? Music Gateway, and that these are some of the tools and and features that people are creating albums essentially from their favorite artists, and that's a capability.
That's right. So, and I just happened to use, I think it was Google Collab, and I don't remember the other one. I was trying to figure out, this was maybe 8 or 9 months ago, how these songs were being done. So I thought I'll just learn. And there were already models that people had created, like algorithms that people had created online, basically stripping an artist's voice from their tracks, removing the background instrumentals, and then plugging all of those vocals into an algorithm so that now you can essentially replicate the voice of Katy Perry or the voice of Eminem on your own and interlace them with whatever song you're writing.
Yeah.
So now you can be the writer of a hit artist song. No, this is not legal. None of this is legal right now.
Well, it's also not necessarily illegal, and we'll try to, that's
this is your territory.
My territory, and then you start looking at the advent of the internet or the sharing of content, the creation of content in the late 90s, early 2000s, and some of the most interesting cases that we covered in law school were how the legal system reacted to new technologies where you're not necessarily sure what the law is or how the law applies. And that's going to be a fascinating area of law over the next few years. Because sometimes you don't know something is illegal until a court case rules on it. Right? And in fact, speaking about new technologies, that's the rule, not the exception. So some fascinating, I don't know which names are going to be on the cases that the law students in 2028, 29 read, but there's going to be some interesting cases around this technology and the utilization, as it relates to public figures and their publicity rights, copyrights, and whatnot.
I agree.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting to monitor.
Excuse me.
God bless you. From there, and some other really interesting uses of AI that you've highlighted, creation of childhood memories, and that you don't have a scrapbook of your memories You know, people did not have cameras on their phone up until recently. So your childhood from any time before about 2011, and you can just speak these memories into an AI generator and out pops the photo that you wish that you had that you didn't get.
Yes. So, I mean, I realize some of these examples are a little obscure and might be creepy to some people, but I did this experiment where I took a handful of photos of me when I was 10 years old, put them into a model so that it understood my face and what I looked like, and then recreated certain memories from my childhood, from me at the arcade, with my friends on my birthday, me at home underneath this fort that I made underneath my stairs that had posters of my favorite, you know, Hollywood celebrities up. And my mom, I sent the photos to my mom, and she's like, "Where did you find these? I've never seen these photos."
Wow.
That's how good they were.
Wow. That's incredible.
And they also looked like they were taken in the 1990s.
Yeah, because it's one of the interesting, one of the charm. You know, listen, you want the charm and the authenticity of those childhood photos. The graininess is kind of, you prefer that. You don't want it to look like something glossy that was shot in digital, right? And so you'd have to explain to me how it.
I simply prompted it with.
No, but for instance, your mom. You want your mom in your photo.
Yeah.
AI can read your mother's image. You know, if you have other photos with other friends of yours from their childhood, or go grab your 7th grade yearbook, the AI can scan all that and input, you know, out pops the photograph with all of your friends from your childhood in the photo as well.
Yes, you could do that.
It's pretty mind-blowing.
You could currently do that. And so, you know, I posted this video whenever it was a couple of months ago, and I was surprised there were a few people who commented that one person lost all of their childhood scrapbooks in a fire, and they were so excited about the idea of using this technology to rebuild their family photo albums. My grandparents, you know, they grew up in the 40s, and so for them, this is a cool opportunity to potentially recreate their love story when they met. I'm working on that. I'm working on that project for them right now.
Very notebook, like Alzheimer's. Okay. That's what you should be working on for sure. Last item on kind of content and media, if you had commented on the Beatles and Paul McCartney's use of AI and you know, some interesting innovative ways they were using it. You know, what was that? Yeah,
so Paul McCartney and the Beatles actually released a new track relatively recently that was an unfinished track from the 60s. And now it's, of course, escaping me because it's been a little bit since I commented on this story. But I don't remember which Beatles member had actually written the track and done a rough recording, but they were able to use AI to strip out his voice so that you could actually work with the raw files and then to replicate his voice. And I think it was the 2 remaining Beatles members who finished the chorus. And I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So what might have been from some of our favorite acts that, you know, were broken up by unscrupulous Japanese performance artists we might be able to see what would have been.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very exciting stuff.
But who knows, you know, Kurt Cobain, a lot of these artists who left us very young, but still had demo tapes.
Sure.
I would not be shocked if their estates at some point decide, you know what, let's take that out and finish that.
Who knows, even Tupac might release a posthumous album, or maybe his 8th. That would be fascinating. Yeah. So moving on from media and the creative arts to a little bit more in terms of human health, safety, medical uses, and you know, and the neuroscience angle here, brain-computer interfaces, BCI. Is that the same terminology that directly applies to your work with BlackRock Neuro? Okay.
Good job.
Yeah, there we go.
Brain-computer interface.
All right, the novice.
It's an interface that connects the brain to a computer.
Right, so it's not just a cute name.
It's not just a cute name.
Love it. So why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, so essentially, and if anyone has heard about Neuralink and what Elon Musk is doing, because that's obviously been all over the news lately. They just implanted a patient. Essentially, the company that I've been working for makes the exact same technology. The only difference is that they've been doing it for 2 decades.
Okay.
So they've had several dozen people who have been implanted with these devices. They're tiny little chips that have 100 electrodes on them. There's these little electrical spikes, and those spikes actually pick up the activity of individual neurons in the brain. And that neuron activity is then sent to a digital device where an AI algorithm is running, processing it, and translating it into digital code that a computer can understand. And so what that enables you to do is a lot of amazing things. So if you've got a person with paralysis, who can no longer move, and you implant them with a BCI in their motor cortex, for instance, which is the part of the brain that deciphers movement. And you have them imagine moving their arm and hand. Well, we can send that information into a computer and actually translate that information into a robotic arm. So now they can actually use their thoughts to control a robotic arm, to feed themselves.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Also, I mean, but anything that you can imagine doing with a digital device, you can do with your brain. So whether that's typing on a computer, doing Photoshop, controlling a robotic arm, controlling a Roomba.
So forget past voice to text, we have think to text.
It's just think to text, that's right.
Wow.
And it works today, and it's been working for 2 decades.
Okay.
We just haven't had an entrepreneur with a big megaphone talking about it until now. So most people just aren't aware of how far along this technology really is. And motor control is not the only thing these devices can do. If you implant the device in the sensory part of the brain, which is responsible for our sense of touch, you can actually inject information back into the brain so that the person with paralysis or the amputee can now sense touch through the digital device.
Okay.
So if you have a robotic arm, let's say the robotic arm is cooking, and once you want to make cake with your robotic arm and you need to crack eggs, you need to be able to feel the pressure that you're placing on the eggs. Otherwise, the eggs will just break. So now we can actually inject that information back into the brain of the person utilizing the robotic arm, so they can sense touch again.
Even though the actual surface area, the part of their body, it's not actual flesh, blood, flesh, and bone, but because it's linked to their brain, just as though that arm was sending the brain signals to touch or whatever sensory input it was getting, gets the same sensory input.
That's exactly right.
Wow, that's amazing.
Or if the person's wearing a prosthetic and they need to know if if the prosthetic is on fire, they would not actually know that it's on fire unless they see that it's on fire, or unless they're getting sensory feedback.
Yeah, that was a much more succinct way of describing that. Very well done. That's why you're the evangelist here.
But it is wild technology.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So what's the market penetration of this? I mean, how many people who have paralysis or amputees have gotten access to this technology, and where's it headed? And who do we invest in?
So very small market at this moment in time. It's all been in clinical trial stages for 2 decades, right? So none of this is commercially available. You can't just go to your doctor if you have paralysis and say, I want a BCI. You have to actually sign up for a trial. It's very important to the FDA that they have a lot of safety data, and they make sure that these devices are safe to have in for your brain for decades. But in terms of where this is all going, there are already several 100,000 people with paralysis who have deep brain stimulation devices implanted deep in the brain, even more deeply than a BCI. These are different than a BCI because there's no real-time communication between a computer and the brain with these devices. But what's similar is that these devices provide electrical stimulation to the part of the brain that impacts the Parkinson's. So I don't know if you've seen this, but people who have DBS implants, you turn on the device and they stop trembling. The tremors just stop. I mean, it's wild. I mean, you can have someone that's really has terrible, terrible side effects, and boom, electrical stimulation on, stop. And and because we've had so much safety data on these hundreds of thousands of people, I think that we will see over the next 10 years the same kind of shift towards BCI, not just with people with paralysis, but really anyone with a neurodegenerative disorder that would have a use for these devices. And then, of course, you're going to have this small section of the population that is aware of the risks and doesn't care and goes to Guatemala or somewhere to go get themselves an implant because they want to be able to sit in bed at night and type to Google using their brain.
Yeah.
So that is going to happen.
For sure.
Because we can't just...
we can't regulate the entire world, cross-border regulation. I mean, we see it with the use of drugs, and you're going to see, you see it with a number of medical procedures. You're going to see it in this realm as well. And that brings up a lot of interesting, and all of this stuff brings up a lot of interesting ethical and philosophical questions. Some of the more prominent voices in the AI world, a lot of the top venture capitalists, because obviously they're all trying to figure this out from a business perspective, and obviously the conversation has dived into ethics and most prominently impacting the attempt to dislodge Sam Altman from OpenAI that failed late last year, which I think was probably a good indicator that the commercial concerns are always going to win out over the supposed ethical concerns.
Sure.
But that has not extinguished the conversation. And so, from what I've gathered, if you're training computers to essentially replicate and mimic humans, just like you want, let's look at systems, right? I mean, religion and theology was a way to educate and instruct human beings on how to tame their worst impulses and to act morally and ethically. So if you're creating machines that are going to be essentially human, what are the concerns about how you're going to train those machines to be moral and ethical, and who gets to decide that?
Right.
On this, what have you seen? What have been interesting conversations, and where do you think the real concerns are? I know that's a very broad question.
Well, there's just so many concerns, right? There's sort of the theoretical concerns that most of us hear about in the news, which is, are our AI overlords going to take over?
It's the Terminator 2 thing. People see too many movies. Are they going to launch the nukes? Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the really real-time concerns that we have around misinformation, around unauthorized use of someone's likeness.
Sure.
We've already seen all of the AI being used for deep fake porn. So it kind of depends, which problem do you want to focus on first? I know that a lot of the engineers that have been working at the big tech companies who've been just racing to put out this technology have felt very nervous. Feeling like we don't quite know what we're building. There's this genie and we've let it out of the bottle.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of concerns, but I will say I've been impressed in looking at the ethics papers from a lot of these companies in terms of how they're trying to address it. They really are trying to address it.
Okay, but are they trying to, if you're talking to Mark Andreessen, for instance.
Yeah.
These solutions worsen the problem. Right?
Correct.
And then playing to some of the topics that I hold near and dear in terms of, if we're looking at free speech, political commentary, social commentary, and quote unquote misinformation, and who gets to determine what misinformation is.
Right.
And during the social media era, the humans who exercised robotic-like power over these platforms did not have a particularly precise definition of misinformation. I don't think we're responsible stewards of whatever the ethical concerns of those platforms were. And then, yes, you're looking at the Andreessens and most of the members of his venture capital firm, and Andrew Chen chimes in on this a lot. And then the kind of adjacent to Andreessen Horowitz is the Founders Fund and Peter Thiel's fund, and these are leading technologists who are more libertarian or more pro-free speech and have usually been correct in their criticism of social media platforms and their censorship and moderation policies. And I think Mike Solana at the Founders Fund, I mean, you mentioned, we created AI capable of answering in seconds any question within the bounds of all recorded human knowledge, and the first thing we asked it to do was lie. And my interpretation of that is that essentially the companies that are kind of instructing from an ethical perspective these early models are training them to follow, much like the social media, the moderation policies of social media companies or Twitter until Elon Musk took it over, to abide by certain progressive orthodoxies, right? And that I saw someone posted a request to a chat, I believe it was ChatGPT, to create an image of a 1930s Nazi soldier, and it wouldn't even, it said it was unable to do so. Who on earth is deciding that it's anathema, that it's taboo for AI, a text to video image generator, to create a did World War II not happen, right? And that other answers to inquiries around political or cultural items, where you can tell that someone put their thumb on the scale, always seem to fall in one direction in terms of protecting the progressive ideas and demonizing or criticizing or blocking certain ideas that I don't necessarily even think are very conservative, but are considered more conservative these days.
Sure.
I know this is a little bit more my terrain, but what have you seen or heard in your discussions around some of these concerns?
No, it's really interesting. I mean, I would love to read some of the things that you've come across in this space. I certainly have noticed the guardrails that exist on a lot of these platforms, which I actually didn't. And maybe this is naive of me to think, but just because they raced to put a lot of this out so quickly, I didn't think of it the same way that I consider the guardrails that exist on social media, because those are like censoring you from being able to express yourself.
Sure.
Whereas these tools are more sort of information gathering tools.
Well, in the, let's call it the pre-Elon Twitter era, it was the trust and safety team looking at someone's tweet and saying, oh, okay, this is wrong think, this violates our content moderation policies. I imagine the AI version is whoever the engineers are that are training the model, the LLM, are training it to abide by a moderation policy that would somewhat mirror what the more hands-on human content moderation activities of a pre-Elon Twitter Trust and Safety Council would do.
Yeah, and I think it's also just, the tricky thing about this, which is so different from social media, is we are teaching the AI model as we use it. And so now you have, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of people on ChatGPT, but we are actively instructing this model on how we want it to behave. And we cannot see in 5 years' time, 7 years' time, how powerful these models will be. And I think there's just a lot of concerns, and so people are generally trying to play it a little bit safer. And in part, that's a little bit of a response, I think, too, to all of the unintended consequences that have come about from social media. Like, I don't think any of us thought when we got on Facebook in 2003 or 4 or 5 or whatever it was, that we would essentially be giving all of our data away to this massive company, and that in 20 years' time, our personal data would become a huge potential issue.
Sure. I guess I didn't really, I kind of expected that.
You did.
Yeah, most people did not. I was like,
you're ahead of the curve.
If I'm talking about stuff, everyone's going to know, I'm not going to be hard to find.
Yeah.
But understood there. And as if you're looking into these issues, you see who on Twitter is the little clusters of people talking about it. It's Andrew Chen, it's Mark Andreessen, it's some couple people that you might see them retweeting, Mike Solana, and a couple of the kind of anonymous accounts that are probably well-known venture capitalists behind them, because the non-anonymous venture capitalists are always retweeting and talking to them. You go check Andreessen's timeline, you'll find your way into enough of the conversations around these topics.
Interesting.
Yeah. Beyond that, beyond censorship, free speech, and if there is a political prejudice to these AI models, other ethical concerns specific that you have seen discussed.
Here's where my handy dandy note sheet comes in.
That's what the note sheet is.
I was like, has anyone ever come onto Matt's podcast with a note sheet?
I mean, more than a couple people, and there's some people who probably would have been better served by doing so.
Right? I mean, well, the problem is I didn't really map out ethics here. I mean, I think we already we touched on it, but the misinformation one is obviously going to be the biggest problem for this year.
High temperature.
Very high temperature, and right now, very high stakes. The stakes couldn't be higher. We have an election coming up. We have a country that is pretty divided, maybe the most divided it's ever been. I don't know where you would place us.
2020 it was more divided. Than 2020. Might be more divided in terms of scope of division now, but the intensity of the division, I think. People, something that I continue to harp on is how people have short memories, and people do not recall the intensity, even before 2020, through the entire first Trump administration, the intensity of the hostile energy around anything political and cultural. And there won't be people, you might get a riot here, a riot there. You will not get people burning down cities summer 2024. You will not have to board up cities on election eve. People forget. Cities were boarded up because they were concerned, if Donald Trump won, that there were going to be large-scale riots and cities being torn down. You will not have that degree of intensity, and the temperature will not rise like that. There will be other things that are weird, but it's not going to get to that level. So, I mean, we can probably call this the second most contentious election. Nothing's going to compare to 2020. But certainly, yes, what is misinformation? Who gets to define it? And are the people defining it properly? And we've had a bit of a battle around that on the social media battle. And yes, I mean, let's actually hope some of these AI developments, it's just hold off till 2025, so we don't have to have that battle around it in 2024.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's what makes me the most concerned about the tools like Sora. Is it's here, and I'm sure it'll be released. And we're talking about video and audio tools where I could take your audio from this podcast, even just 2 minutes of it, actually less than that, 6 seconds of it, but for the most accurate Matt Bilinsky model, I'd need 2 minutes.
Oh, that would have to be accurate.
And I could make you say anything I want you to say, and it would sound exactly like you with your cadence. That's terrifying. Like, how do we sense make?
Sure. It's going to be difficult to sense make. Another interesting kind of the flip side of that, though, is interesting that anyone can claim that somebody just fabricated something.
Which is also
you're going to be like,
now we really have no sense making.
Yeah, the diligence process to verify what's real and what's not, because just like anyone can fabricate something, anyone can use that as a defense. It was like, I didn't say that. Look, go. You can go. Unless you go really peek under the hood and take the time to go verify that. Oh yeah, someone used Sora to make me look stupid. And there's going to be, I'm sure that the dust will settle on that eventually, but in the interim, as this technology is being rolled out and people get used to it, I think a lot of those battles are going to be fought for sure.
100%.
Yeah.
So that's the thing I'm most nervous about this year, and not just for the election, just in general, like our ability to, I'm just always
share reality,
and it's hard enough to share reality when we don't have these tools in place, and somehow we have people seeing 2 different realities or 3 different or 4 different realities, and now
add a 0 or 2 to that now.
Infinite, right? Yeah. So that's really terrifying. I think the thing that feels most critical to me is for kids to learn critical thinking and a process of arriving at like conclusions and information and the kinds of questions we should be asking people. To make sure, that we can arrive at the best possible sort of conclusion.
Yeah, no doubt.
With the information given.
My prediction, for better for worse, there is that these AI tools are gonna, are gonna serve the results there for children are gonna be somewhat like the results for, your just basic digital media 1.0 or 2.0 tools, and that it's gonna serve some incredibly well and probably the long tail not that well. And that's just the nature.
Explain that.
That technology increases the stakes, the velocity, and scale, and allows those who are able to utilize the tools properly to aggregate the benefits, more concentrated benefits, and those benefits being acquired at a faster pace. That's why you see so many, go look at the people occupying houses in the Hollywood Hills. There have always been a few young actors or athletes who might make enough money to go and be independently wealthy. Now, so much of the youth has leapfrogged the generations that were already in their adulthood before technology came around. They created companies and software and were entrepreneurial or content creators. And however, when I was 24, however many people were my age and had attained some degree of independent wealth, not from their parents, was X, and now that is about 100X.
Right.
Then the other thing that technology and social media presents are distractions and temptations. So those who are to give in to distraction and temptation and some of the bad stuff that you will find on the social media, the surface area of exposure for that is exponentially wider, and they have suffered from that, and that's why you see record volume of anxiety, depression, and dissatisfaction amongst the youth. For better, for worse, sure, I would like it to turn out differently. However, I think AI is going to be the same way. Those who are talented and effective and know how to utilize it for advancements in productivity, creativity, and ways to acquire wealth through that or other, life ease, are going to do very well. And the people who get lost in kind of sitting there, being distracted by the things that are just passive consumers, in a variety of ways, they're going to suffer even more. Yes, there's a high concentration of benefits and a lot of distractions and temptations that will not be productive for the long tail of individuals. But out of AI may also come some solutions to some of the harmful impacts of Web 2.0 and social media, and that maybe this will give rise to new degrees of understanding and solutions to the basic distractions of kids, getting screwed up by playing these status games that get shoved in their face each day by social media, and that leading to distraction, anxiety, and depression. So I'm not fatalistic about that, but if we're looking at the effects of the leverage, scale, and velocity created by digital media and social media, and apply that to AI and our new future machine overlords, there are some concerns. But I'm generally a techno optimist, much like Andreessen, and he's maybe not quite as much as he is, and that this being unfettered by the concerns and a more libertarian approach to it is going to yield the best results. I mean, that's a philosophical conversation that we can get into for quite some time. But I think we've covered a number of interesting philosophical and ethical questions about AI. And to finish up here, maybe we will downshift back to the everyday, practical, day-to-day uses for normal people just out there in terms of thinking about how your average individual who's not a content creator, who's not a neuroscientist or the subject of a neuroscientist experiment, is utilizing AI right now, or how it's going to be available over the next 12 months. And you think about it, you hear what are the potential uses. A lot of it kind of is in the realm of virtual assistant, that okay, great, I can use it as my virtual travel agent, or to book a reservation, or gather some information about some research topic that I was interested in very quickly, or utilize it to generate a lengthy email that I had to write that would otherwise take me an extra half hour. I don't know, what are those tools and how do people get used to them, and how do they learn how to use them?
I think you already gave some great use case examples. The question really is, where can AI help you in your life? And it's all about optimizing for the things that you want to optimize for. Some people just want to make more money or be more productive. Other people want to feel happier. They want to feel less anxious. And there are a million ways to slice this pie and use these tools. I mean, the first thing I always tell people to do is start using ChatGPT now on simple problems that you need to solve in your life. Like, maybe you do have a challenging conversation coming up with a fellow coworker and you don't know the best way to approach it. Learning how to use these tools, learning how to prompt and instruct these tools makes all of us better communicators, first of all, right? So, and learning, how what you put into the AI provides a very different results. So you could say something like, I need to approach a difficult conversation with my coworker. Can you please provide me a few different ways to do that using different different communication styles? One being a more assertive style, one being a nonviolent communication style, right? And we can start to learn and kind of grow our expertise on being human and how to be human better. So the sky is kind of the limit in how these tools are used. I really like some of the potential mental health aspects of this. There's a number of tools that are already out there for this, and I'm using a couple of them. One which can actually analyze certain text message threads that you provided, of course, all private data, to determine how you could improve your interrelational communication. To improve communication. It'll actually give you
found benefit out of that.
Absolutely. It'll give you real tips, and you read it and you're like, oh yeah, that seems so obvious. Right? But just that's really helpful. Another thing could be priming. So we know visualization, certain kinds of language primes our brain to think certain ways. Just reframing situations that are causing us angst, anxiety is helpful. So a lot of these AI tools are also doing that. You can basically use it as a therapist, sit there, record something that is super upsetting that you're kind of navigating through, and have the AI help you reframe it, and then send you little prompts throughout the day so that it's not something that's hanging over you. One of the examples that I used earlier is that I'm helping my grandparents rebuild kind of a story of how they met and their love story.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Right. And they've been together 75 years. So there's endless possibilities for how you can use these tools. It really just comes down to your imagination and your ability to communicate with them to get the results that you're looking for.
Got it. And probably a challenge, challenge yourself to become a better communicator, to allow these tools to help you become a better communicator. So essentially, for the layperson out there, just beginning to utilize ChatGPT, getting used to prompt and instruction, that's going to put you ahead of God knows how many people.
100%. Yeah. I always say AI is not going to take your job. The person who knows how to use AI is.
Could not have said it better myself. And once again, that's why you are the AI evangelist translator. And we're doing this in 2017, 18, before anyone was on this beat. Taryn, as always, an incredible innovator and just so knowledgeable about how new technologies and things that are at the forefront of what the smartest people are thinking about and using, and how that's going to impact our lives. Obviously, I promised everybody that they were going to get our origination story,
Yes,
and they have to
please.
hear it.
It's
And
so
of course,
funny.
you know, being when I was sitting there as an innovator myself, sitting there in law school, like, oh my God, I got to go start a business or something with my best friend. And we're like, okay, we have a buddy of ours started a pickup and delivery laundry service for rich, lazy kids at colleges. And we're like, oh, USC sounds like a good place to build that. And we did it. And of course, we needed attractive young ladies to hand out flyers on Frat Row, and one of them happened to be the world's leading AI tech evangelist here.
And I think it was my first.
Was that your first job ever? Was that the first time?
It wasn't my first job, but it was my first gig in LA.
Okay, your first
my
gig
first
in
LA
LA.
gig. I think I was 17 or 18 years old.
So the lesson, obviously, to be gleaned from this is that the quickest path to success is to be hired to hand out flyers on my behalf. Clearly. Taryn.
And help your empire, your laundry empire.
Yeah, the laundry empire that we sold way too early to the kid who drove the van for us. But that's another story.
You were Uber for laundry.
And we fucking sold it and like, oh, okay, don't even ask. But God bless the kid who I still see him and he's raking in cash. But anyways, a story for another time. Taryn, thank you so much. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you?
Oh, thank you. I'm just Taryn Southern across all of the platforms.
All the good stuff. What's the good AI platform that where can we find all your AI stuff? That's not there yet?
Just Instagram.
Okay.
Instagram.
Fantastic.
Yep.
And everybody, you know, as usual, my socials where you see me, I'm trying to kind of try to aggregate as much good information from Taryn as possible. Twitter and Instagram at Matt Bilinsky. Obviously, likes, comments, subscriptions, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. I hope this has been edifying for everybody. I know it has been for me. Taryn, thank you again so much.
Thank you so much.